Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we get into anything, I just want to say, if you're here right now, you probably made it through part 1. And if you did, you already know the kind of atmosphere we're stepping back into. Those stories weren't just something you listened to and forgot about. They had weight to them. They lingered. Maybe you caught yourself thinking about one of them later that night. Or maybe you woke up and it was still sitting somewhere in the back of your mind. That's the thing about stories from Reddit nosleep. They don't just try to scare you in the moment. They stay with you. And tonight, we're going even further. This is part 2. And I spent a long time digging through some of the most unsettling, disturbing, and genuinely unnerving stories I could find. Not just the ones with jump scares or predictable twists, but the ones that feel real, the ones that slowly build piece by piece until you're fully pulled in. And by the time you realise how deep you are, it's already too late to look away. There's something different about these kinds of stories. They don't rely on monsters jumping out at you or loud noises to get your attention. Instead, they create this quiet, creeping feeling. The kind that makes ordinary things suddenly feel off. A shadow in the corner of your room. A noise you can't quite explain. The sense that something isn't right, even when everything looks completely normal. And maybe that's what makes them so effective. Because when the story ends, your world doesn't suddenly snap back to normal. You're still sitting in the same room, the same silence, the same darkness. And just for a moment, it's hard to tell where the story stopped and where reality picked back up. So, wherever you are right now, I want you to really take a second and settle in. Maybe you've got headphones on. Maybe the lights are already off. Maybe it's late and the world outside has gone completely quiet. That's the perfect setting for this kind of thing. Because these stories hit different when you're alone with your thoughts. And I'm not going to lie to you. Some of the ones in this video are a lot. They're the kind that might make you pause for a second. The kind that might make you rewind just to make sure you heard something correctly. The kind that doesn't just scare you, but sticks with you in a way that's hard to shake. So, if you start feeling a little uneasy while you're listening, that's completely normal. In fact, that probably means it's working. Now, quick warning before we really get into it. If you're easily disturbed, or if you don't like the stories that blur the line between fiction and reality, this might not be the best place to be right now. But if you're still here, if you're curious, and if you want to see just how deep this rabbit hole goes, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Alright, get comfortable, turn the lights down if you haven't already, maybe check behind you, just in case, and let's step back into the dark. My mother came home from the hospital on a Tuesday. She'd only been in for 3 days. Gallbladder. Routine, the surgeon said. She called me Tuesday morning and asked if I could pick her up, and I said, of course. She was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed when I got there, fully dressed, hands folded in her lap. She smiled when she saw me. I remember thinking she looked good, better than before she went in, actually. Her skin had this clarity to it, like she slept deeply for the first time in years. You look great, Mum. I feel wonderful, she said. On the drive home, she was quiet, which wasn't unusual. She watched the houses go by. At one point, she turned to me and said, "The trees are so green." It was mid-October. The trees were not green. They were gold and rust, and some of them were bare. I glanced at her, and she was smiling at the window like she was seeing something I wasn't. I chalked it up to the anesthesia. The first week was fine, mostly fine. She moved around the house carefully, holding her side where the incisions were. I brought her groceries. I made her soup. She thanked me every time, very formally, like I was a neighbour she didn't know well. "Thank you so much for doing this," she'd say. Not, "Thanks, honey." Not, "You're a lifesaver." The full sentence, every time, like she was reading it. Day 4. I opened her fridge to put away milk and noticed the food I'd brought on day 1 hadn't been touched. Not the soup, not the crackers, not the applesauce. I asked if she'd been eating. "Oh yes," she said. "I've been eating." There was nothing in the trash. I started stopping by without calling first. I told myself I was just being a good son. The truth is, something had started pulling at me, a low hum in the back of my skull that I couldn't name. I came by on a Saturday morning, maybe 10 days after she got home. I used my key. The house was silent. Not quiet. Silent. No refrigerator hum, no heat ticking through the vents, no clock on the mantel. I know that sounds impossible. I'm telling you what I heard, which was nothing. I found her in the living room. She was sitting in Dad's old recliner, which she never used. She hated that chair. After he died, she talked about giving it to Goodwill a dozen times. She was sitting in it with her hands on the armrests, back straight, feet flat on the floor, not reading, not watching TV. The TV wasn't on. She was facing the wall. "Mum?" She turned her head, not her body, just her head, smooth and slow, like a security camera. "Oh, hello. Thank you so much for coming by." "What are you doing?" "Sitting," she said. "In the dark?" She looked around the room as though she hadn't noticed. "I suppose so." I turned on her lamp. In the light, I could see that the house was immaculate. Not clean the way she kept it, which was tidy but lived in. Magazines on the coffee table, a blanket on the couch, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter. This was empty clean, catalogue clean, every surface bare. The photographs on the mantel were still there, but they'd been rearranged. They were evenly spaced now, perfectly, like someone had used a ruler. I opened the fridge again. It was empty. completely empty, including what I'd brought. But the trash was still bare. "Mum, where's all the food?" "I ate it," she said from the other room. "All of it?" I was hungry. Something about the way she said hungry made me close the fridge very gently and stand there for a moment with my hand on the door. 2 weeks in, I brought my wife Sarah to visit. We sat in the kitchen and Mum served us tea. She'd bought a new kettle. Chrome, expensive looking. Not her style. Mum was a yard sale person. She liked things with history. The conversation was normal on the surface. She asked about Sarah's job. She asked about our dog. But every response she gave was slightly delayed, like there was a half second of processing before she spoke. And she never blinked during the conversation. Not once. I watched for it. 15 minutes of talking and her eyes never closed. In the car, Sarah was quiet for a long time. "She seemed good," she finally said in the voice she uses when she's choosing her words. "But," she called me Sarah. "That's your name." She's called me sweetheart for 9 years. Every time. Even on the phone. Even in texts. Sarah looked at me. She called me Sarah like she was reading my name off a tag. 3 weeks. I went over on a Wednesday night. It was late, almost 11. I don't know why. That hum in my head had gotten louder. I parked across the street and sat in my car and watched the house. Every light was off, but through the front window I could see movement. Just barely. Just the faintest suggestion of something pacing in the living room. Back and forth, back and forth, steady as a metronome. The shape would reach one wall, stop, turn with mechanical precision and walk back, over and over. I watched for 20 minutes. The rhythm never broke, not once. I drove home. I didn't go inside. Month 2, she started calling me, always at 3 a.m. Always exactly 3. My phone would light up, "Mum," on the screen, and when I answered, there would be silence. Not dead air. I could hear the room. I could hear space, but she wouldn't speak. The 4th time it happened, I said, "Mum, please say something. You're scaring me." Very quietly, almost a whisper, "I'm practicing." Practicing what? Silence. Then she hung up. The next day, I went over and asked about the calls. She looked at me with that new blankness and said, "I haven't called you." I showed her my phone, the call log, 4 calls, all from her number, all at 3 a.m. She looked at the screen for a long time, too long, like she was memorizing it. "That's strange," she said. "I've been sleeping very well." I called her doctor. I described the symptoms, the not eating, the personality changes, the night pacing. He said it could be a reaction to the anesthesia. He said some patients, especially older ones, experience temporary cognitive disruption. He said to monitor her and bring her in if it got worse. It got worse. I came by on a Sunday. The front door was open. Not unlocked. Open. Wide open. In November, and the house was freezing. I found her in the bathroom. She was standing in front of the mirror. When I came in, she didn't turn around. I could see her face in the reflection. She was smiling. Not her smile. Too wide. The muscles in her face were doing something they shouldn't have been able to do. Stretched, in a way that looked painful, and her eyes were locked on her own reflection with an intensity that made my stomach drop. "Mum, I'm getting better at it," she said to the mirror. "Better at what?" She turned around. The smile vanished instantly, like a light switch. Her face was normal, perfectly normal. And somehow, that was worse. "At feeling better," she said. "Isn't that what you want?" I put a camera in the living room, a nanny cam, hidden in a bookshelf. I'm not proud of it, but I was sleeping 2 hours a night and I needed to understand. The first night I checked the footage, I almost threw the laptop across the room. At 2:47 a.m, she walked into the living room. She stood in the center of the room, perfectly still for 6 minutes. Then she began to move. She stretched her arms out to the sides and rotated them, slowly, testing the joints. She tilted her head to the left, then the right, far past what should have been comfortable. She opened and closed her hands, staring at them, flexing each finger individually like she was counting them. Then she looked up, directly at the camera, directly at it. She shouldn't have known it was there. I'd hidden it behind books. She smiled, the too wide smile, and she waved. Not a normal wave. She waved the way a child waves who has just learned how. Mechanical, deliberate, each finger moving separately. Then she said, clearly enough for the camera's microphone to pick up, "I know you're worried, but she's not in pain anymore. I want you to know that." She, not I, she. I drove to the house at 3 a.m. I pounded on the door. She opened it in her bathrobe, looking confused, looking normal. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" she said. And that was the thing that broke me, because she hadn't called me sweetheart since she came home. She'd been calling me by my name, formally, like a stranger. And now, at 3 a.m, with me shaking on her doorstep, she pulled out the right word, like she'd been practicing that too. I went inside. I sat her down. I played the video. I watched her face as she watched herself on the screen, standing in the dark, moving wrong, waving at a camera she shouldn't have known about. She watched the whole thing. Her face showed nothing. When it was done, she looked at me. She looked at me for a long, long time. And then something shifted. Something behind her eyes rearranged itself, like a mask being adjusted from the inside. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," she said. Her voice was different, lower, flatter, not my mother's voice. I needed more time. More time for what? To learn her. To learn how she held her mouth when she was happy. How she said your name. The way she touched your hair when you were small. She paused. That one has been the hardest. The love. It doesn't translate well. I've been practicing, but it keeps coming out wrong. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "What are you?" I whispered. She smiled, not the too wide smile. A small, sad smile that looked almost right. Almost. She prayed, at the end, on the table, when her heart stopped for 2 minutes before they brought her back. She prayed for more time with you. The thing wearing my mother's face reached out and touched my hand. Its skin was cold. Not cool, cold, like touching a countertop. I am what answered. That was 4 months ago. She's better now. She's so much better. She calls Sarah sweetheart. She bakes on Sundays. She laughs at the right moments and cries at the right ones too. Last week, she touched my hair the way Mum used to. Absent-minded, gentle, tucking a strand behind my ear. It was perfect. Every detail, perfect. And that's why I'm writing this. Not because I want help. Not because I think anyone can do anything. I'm writing this because I need someone to know that the woman in that house is not my mother. She is something that studied my mother, learned my mother, and is performing my mother with more precision every single day. And the worst part? The part that wakes me up at night? The part that I will carry with me until I die? Last Sunday, she made my favorite meal. She set the table the way Mum always did. Fork on the left, knife and spoon on the right, napkin folded into a triangle. She poured me a glass of wine and sat across from me and told me about her week and asked about mine. It was the most normal evening I'd had in months. When I left, she hugged me at the door. She held on a beat longer than necessary, the way Mum always did, and she whispered, "I love you." And I said it back, because whatever is in that house, whatever crawled into my mother's body or grew out of the space where she used to be, it's trying. It's trying so hard to love me. And some nights, I let it. My mum is a doctor, but her patients only come to her for one thing. My mum has always been my idol, the biggest role model in my life. When my dad died shortly after I was born, she raised me on her own while also maintaining her career as a doctor. My grandmother offered support when she could, but my mum was the foundation. As I grew older, I noticed that I was not the only person who seemed to depend on her wisdom and guidance. I was maybe 6 or 7 when I began to notice the woman. White, black, Asian, Hispanic, early 20s, late 40s, fairly well on in their 50s. There didn't seem to be a particular type or requirement to come and see my mother, but whenever they would come, my mum would send me to my room. That was fine with me. I was usually given a snack or something, and I kept myself busy with whatever new gaming system or computer I had at the time. Whatever my mum was doing to treat these patients didn't take long. After about 15 minutes or so, my mum would poke her head in my room, her grey eyes bright as she'd let me know our latest guest had gone. Mum was certainly making a pretty penny at the hospital, but we lived in a standard 2-story, 3-bedroom house. Our spare room, located right next to my mum's, was her medical chamber. She kept it under lock and key, telling me that there were many instruments I could hurt myself with, or expensive equipment that she didn't want me to break. I had never once been inside the room before, but I never gave it much thought. By the time I was 15 years old, though, I started to wonder about something. As far as I knew, my mother was an obstetrician, the most renowned in town, and yet none of the women who visited us, not one, had ever been pregnant. One day, I was sitting on the couch eating scrambled eggs. There was a knock at the door. My mum was off at work, and she taught me never to let anyone into our house under any circumstance if she was not there. I had grown used to ignoring any phone calls to the landline or unexpected visitors, but whoever was standing outside was persistent. They banged non-stop at the wood and even began to yell. Annoyed, I trudged over to the door and yanked it open aggressively. There was a woman standing there, sweat running down her round, pale face that was framed by her dark hair. She wore a dirty white dress and was quite obviously pregnant, but her eyes were what drew my attention. They were wide, panicked, full of cold, unmistakable fear. "Abel," she whispered, her chest rising and falling as she seemed on the verge of hyperventilating. "Abel, is your mother here?" I was more than a little uncomfortable that this woman knew my name, but she was clearly a client of my mother's, so I didn't worry too much about it. No, she's not. She'll be back in a few hours. I'll tell her to give you a cup. No, I need her now. Right now, goddammit. You call her and tell her that I need her now. I recoiled, startled by this woman's escalating aggression. There was something wrong, but what the hell was I supposed to do? "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you... Listen to me, boy. You call her, and you call her now, or else I'll call the cops and tell them about what she's got back there." The woman's eyes were glowing, as though she felt she had the leverage on me. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but I also didn't want my mum to get in trouble. I called her and told her about the woman's threat, and she was pulling into the driveway 20 minutes later. The woman who was kneeling on the porch, panting, sprang up immediately. I've changed my mind. I can't do this. I can't. I'm not fit to be a mother. You take this thing out of me. Take it out now, you bitch! My mother was expressionless. She stared at the woman. She didn't blink as she replied, "All right, come with me." She glanced at me as she stepped into the house, and I knew what it meant. I dashed into my room, closing the door behind me. I was curious now. I put my ear to the door, listening as their footsteps padded down the hall. When I heard the door to the medical chamber close, I stepped into the hall. I listened intently. A few seconds went by in silence, and then I heard a blood-curdling scream. This was followed by a loud thud, and I retreated back into my room and pretended to play my PS5. It didn't take 15 minutes this time. My mum, blood on her face, stuck her head in my room. "I've got to get back to work, dear. I'll make tacos tonight." Call me stupid, but I do have a conscience. I knew that my mother had done something terrible to this woman, and I couldn't just sit fiddling my thumbs knowing this. That poor lady hadn't left the chamber, and I couldn't just leave her there, hurt and pregnant. I walked my mum back out of the driveway, and then I snuck into her room. I went through her drawers, opened her closet, checked under the bed. I couldn't find the key, so I resorted to brute force. I rammed my shoulder repeatedly into the door. It took a while, but then the hinges finally gave in and the door fell open. Sore and wheezing, I fell to my knees. There was a foul odour, like nothing I had ever smelled before, wafting out of the dark room. I did not belong in here. Still, I had opened Pandora's box, and now I had to face the chaos. When I stood up and my eyes adjusted to the dark, the first thing I saw was the woman lying on the floor. Blood was pooling under her head, and she was motionless. Yet her belly seemed to be pulsing, the baby inside seemingly trying to escape. I was horrified beyond disbelief, but then I felt a sort of pull. It was as though I was a moth, but the thing attracting me wasn't light. No, this was darkness beyond comprehension. A great, wiggling, pink and red mass was situated in the middle of the room. It rose about 7 feet in the air and was about 5 feet wide. It had multiple tendrils, thick and wet into seas, thrashing to and fro. There were slits all over it, which opened and closed repeatedly as though it was breathing. It had a single eye, set in its centre near the top, yellow and full of pus. It stared into my own eyes, and I stood transfixed. It never blinked. It only looked upon me in what I can only describe as admiration. The cursed eye shifted from me over to the dead woman on the floor, the thing that shouldn't be seen to tremble, fluids excreting all over it, and then one of the tendrils suddenly extended, shooting past me and grabbing the woman's ankle. She dragged her up close, and I'd rather not describe what I was forced to watch. I probably have gone insane. but my clarity has somehow prevented me from losing it. After the tendrils were finished, they deposited something into the woman, and her belly abruptly stopped moving. The eye was looking at me again now, and I found myself moving forward. I knew now. It all made sense. All those desperate women, they had all come here for one thing they couldn't get naturally, whether it was the fault of a man or their own body. My mum had been giving them little miracles. I spread my arms and hugged the great behemoth before me, feeling all of its warmth. Slime ran down my face and into my mouth as I whispered, "Dad." My older brother, who ate my dog 10 years ago, wants to reconnect. I'm typing this out on my phone while sitting in the freezing cold, so bear with me if this seems rushed, but I need to give some context. I always had the sense that something was off about my older brother Mark. I have all these memories about him from when I was little, and I've had trouble discerning whether they were real or imagined. My earliest memory. I was with my brother while he cut up a squirrel in our backyard. I must have been no more than 4, since we still lived in the rental house. I guess that would have made him about 11. I actually saw him do this a few more times after the first. He'd snatch them up, grab a knife out of his pocket, and slice them open. He'd start at the collarbone, cut down the belly, and stop right at the bottom of the abdomen. He would tell me that he was just unzipping their jackets, that the gummy, wet pink stuff beneath the fur was their regular skin, and that they'd only shrieked and squirmed because it was cold. It was silly enough to make me laugh. Of course, Mum didn't laugh when I finally told her about it. Mark stopped showing me his squirrels after that. Things got weirder after we moved into our permanent house. There were times that I stumbled upon him in the middle of the night. I'd find him sitting on the floor outside the study, reading these big old textbooks that Dad had saved from the Stop Draw program in microbiology. I guess that wasn't necessarily all that weird, but still worth mentioning. Although he stopped publicly killing animals, I'd still find cut-up squirrels, raccoons, and lizards around the property. They'd be missing organs. Sometimes different stringy pieces would be splayed out all over the ground. There were a few with their brains all gone. My parents knew something was off about him and had him see doctors because of it. Mark, from ages 10 to 18, was revolving door of psychologists, psychiatrists, behavioural specialists, CPS workers, and anything else that they could throw at the wall. I guess nothing stuck. I say that because, as the title suggests, when Mark was 18, he ate my dog. My parents brought me a 2-year-old Yorkie named Scarlet for my 10th birthday. I had a blast taking care of her. She loved sleeping in her little pink doggy bed at the end of the hallway between our 2-bedroom doors. I woke up one night after a nightmare. A scream jolted me awake. I sat up and listened, hearing a wet, crushing sound from underneath my door. It sounded like mac and cheese. I walked over and put my ear over the door with a cupped hand. 2 sets of breathing, one heavy and deep, and the other shallow and ragged. My heart thudded as I twisted the handle and peeked through. Mark was crouched over the dog bed. A pool of blood was forming underneath, wetting his bare feet. He was tinkering with something dark red, although I couldn't see what it was. Looking down, I saw Scarlett's face sideways in the bed. Her eyes were glazed over, and she was panting lightly. I gasped. He turned towards me, quickly shoving a piece of pink flesh into his mouth with a wet, jittery hand. He chewed, staring at me with unblinking eyes. There was blood streaked across his face and staining his teeth. I burst through the door and sprinted down the hall away from him as fast as I could. The image of him was burned in my mind. Not just him eating the dog, not just those eyes. It was his hand. I swear to God, it had 6 fingers. Any of the rest of that stuff could be explained by a psycho kid, but not that. That was something else. He had transformed. I ran to my parents' bedroom and got their attention. There was a lot of screaming that night. I hid in my parents' room while they dealt with him. He was gone by morning, and all I knew was that they decided to kick him out. It was the last straw, and since he was 18, they had no responsibility to house him. I didn't see him for 10 years after that. He reached out to me a few months ago. I'm 21, in the middle of my degree, and he's 28, living further from home in Louisiana, working at a tire shop. He found me through Facebook and asked if I wanted to go with him on a cross-country train from New Orleans to Chicago. He said he'd pay for it just so we could finally get together and catch up after so long. It was only right. We were brothers after all. As much as the idea of spending 3 nights in a train car with him intimidated me, he was right. It had been so long. He was my brother. At the time, I hadn't thought about any of those memories in so long that I wasn't even sure any of them were real. Besides, it sounded fun. I always wanted to go to Chicago. Meeting him at the New Orleans station felt unreal. He looked like me, but distorted in a funhouse mirror. His face was painted with wrinkles and a tired smile. His skin was paper white, and his hair was dark and shaggy. He was quite a bit taller than me, and really skinny. When I hugged him, it felt like I could break his ribs if I squeezed just a little too hard. With that being said, he actually was pretty lively. He was excited to see me and had lots to say about his life since moving out. He had stayed at a friend's apartment until he landed an odd job and stuck it out until he could afford his own place. He went through a good number of positions, the tie shop being his most recent. I wanted to ask him about the elephant in the room, Scarlett. I was too scared. He told me he was excited to see all the little towns we'd passed through while travelling up Mississippi and Tennessee. All the interesting people, buildings, nature, and the like. We soon boarded the train, handed off our luggage, and climbed through a tight set of stairs to the second floor. We ended up in a tiny compartment with 2 inward-facing seats with a window and a small folding table between. A bed could fold down from the ceiling, and the seats could roll down into a second bed. All in all, it wasn't that comfortable, but we had a nice view. The initial ride was nice. We sat watching the swampy marshes of Louisiana transform into the warm, long-leaf pine forests of Mississippi, dotted with ferns and short palmettos. I couldn't help but notice that he was fidgeting with his fingernails on one hand. The nail beds were deep and flaky. He hid it under the table when he realized I was watching. When it came time for dinner, passengers were called into the dining car for their reserved slots. When we came in, we were seated at a booth on one side with a young couple on the other. Neither of us are very social, so it was a little awkward eating with strangers at first. They introduced themselves as Kate and Jim and said they were taking the train to Chicago for their honeymoon. They thought it was real sweet what we were doing, a brother bonding trip across the country. When we settled in for the night, I took the top bunk and Mark took the bottom at his own request. Although I had trouble because of the constant shaking and the noises of the train, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of him opening the sliding door and leaving the room. Light from the hall pierced my squinting eyes. I tried to ignore it, but he kept coming in and out repeatedly for a long while. When he finally left the room the last time, no light came in. I checked my watch. 4:12 a.m. I shifted the blinds covering the window facing the hall. The lights outside of the room were off. They were supposed to always be on. After a while, he still hadn't come back. I checked my watch again. 4:50 a.m. Deciding that I should check the bathroom to see if he was okay, I crawled down to the bottom bunk and snuck out into the dark hallway. The space was desolate. I could see nothing but the faint glow of an emergency light in the stairwell, and I could only hear the grinding railway beneath me. Tiptoeing to the bathroom, I found it empty. I continued forward into the next train car. It was the dining car, also completely devoid of people. It was pitch black inside. I could only see with the flashlight on my phone. I moved forward into another passenger car, all black again. The next was the observation car. It was a big open room with windows lining all the walls and parts of the ceiling. No light came from the outside, and there was no sign of Mark. When I was about halfway down the aisle, I saw something in the small window of the door ahead that led to the next train car. A pair of wide eyes in the dark were peeking at me, only visible in the flashlight's pitfall cone of light. About 5 meters ahead of me, just on the other side of the door. Suddenly, the sound of the train faded. I got tunnel vision. All I could see was a thing staring back at me. A fight or flight reflex coursed through my veins. My heart was thudding loudly in my chest. My brain was screaming at me to turn around and run. So I did. I was sweating when I made it back to the room, my fingers tingling. I climbed into the top bunk and tried and failed to calm myself and sleep. Suddenly, I awoke to the sound of Mark entering the room. It was bright. I didn't even remember falling asleep. My full head was still sweaty. Get up. It's already 9 a.m. and you missed the last stop in Mississippi. We just started moving again, he said, banging the underside of my bunk. I swung my head over the side to look down at him. You went out into the station? He looked up at me as he took off his denim jacket. Yeah, I checked it out. Just walked around a little. The right sleeve had a dark red stain smeared over the cuff. I gulped, my throat dry. What's on your sleeve? He looked at it and paused before answering. Oh, just a stain from dinner last night. He folded it up and tossed it under his chair. Anyways, come with me. It's time for our breakfast reservation. As we sat and waited at our booth, the same couple from the day before appeared. As they passed, Jim gave us a glare and looked away without a word, grabbing Kate by the shoulder. She avoided eye contact completely. Mark told me about a stop he wanted to get out later that evening. A place called Slaughter, a little town with a few hundred people. We joked about it for a bit. I agreed to get out and look around with him when the time came. After breakfast, I took a nap while Mark sat in the observation car. When it came time for lunch at 2 p.m, Mark sat it out to go shower instead. I went to the dining car alone. I saw Jim walk down the aisle and I stopped him before he passed my booth. Hey, you here for lunch? Wanna sit here? I motioned to the seat across from me. His brow furrowed as he turned to me. You think this is some kind of fucking joke? What? I don't understand, I said, baffled by his comments. Your older brother. His sick shit. I'm tired of it. Y'all scared my wife, he said, pointing at me and back towards the passenger car. What happened? I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I'll tell you what happened. He sat down at the booth across from me. I woke up to Kate screaming her ass off at 4 a.m. Your brother was staring at her through the window of our room. My blood ran cold. Seriously? I didn't know that. Jim grimaced. He left real quick once I sat up. She says he must have been there a long time, just watching. She wanted to keep the blinds partly open to let a little light in. He watched through there. You know, the lights went out for a while last night, I said nervously, fiddling with my fork. That's the thing. I noticed when the lights went out about an hour before she saw him in the window. Those lights came on just a minute after he left. Real convenient, huh? I cleared my throat. Listen, that is weird. I'm sorry. I had no idea. I'll talk to him. You better. He stood up and stormed away. Mark denied it. Said he had no clue what the guy was talking about, that he must have been crazy. I tried to ignore the situation. The train ride would end by morning anyway. In the early evening, when the intercom announced the 5-minute stop in Slaughter, Mark grabbed me and urged me to put my shoes and jacket on. We stepped off the train into the cold, fading light of the dead rail town. We walked off towards one tiny building that made up the station and told me to wait. I was left kicking my feet at the dusty concrete. I heard shouting and looked over. Jim was arguing with one of the rail workers about not being able to find his wife. He was pissed. I checked my watch. The train was due to start back up in just a minute. Mark was still gone. I rushed over to the station building and walked in, expecting to see him. He was nowhere in the waiting room. I asked the worker at the desk if they had seen anyone. They said no one had come through in the past hour. I heard the rail worker outside shout. When I came out, they motioned to get back on the train. It was due to leave in a few seconds. I told him I was still waiting on my brother, and he said the train was on a tight schedule and would leave regardless. After a few seconds of arguing, he backed away from me towards the train. I clenched my jaw as I watched Jim and the other passengers on their smoke breaks get on. The worker looked at me with a shrug. I looked back towards the desolate town before me. I turned back and shrugged at him. He closed the door. I watched as the train started moving. In just a few seconds, it was gone. The town, at least the area right by the station, is littered with a boarded up old businesses and trash. There's no one in sight. It's about 30 degrees. I've been sitting here on this cold metal bench, writing this all out. It's dark now, and I'm still trying to think of what I'm going to do to find Mark. He won't pick up the phone. I guess I'll update this when I find him. We rented a cabin in the woods near a small town in Kentucky. The locals warned us not to arrive after dark. Damn it, Olivia. It's 4 p.m. We were supposed to leave 3 hours ago, I said angrily, holding the phone to my ear and packing the last suitcase into the car. I know, there's nothing I can do about it. I was supposed to stop by the office for 2 hours to help the girls with a few things because there are a lot of clients and my boss kept piling more work on me. I can't say no. You know we need the money, she said in a raised voice, then added after a moment. I'm finishing up now. I'll be home in 30 minutes at the latest. Pack the car and I'll get back and we can go. I hung up. It wasn't the first time her boss had made her come into work even on her day off. She worked at an insurance company and they always had problems finding employees. Olivia agreed to it, and even though it irritated me, I kept quiet because she was the one mainly supporting us. She made really good money. I'm a graphic designer. I pick up jobs that are becoming fewer and fewer every year. While I fight competition and the rise of artificial intelligence by offering rates that sometimes translate into less than minimum wage. This trip was our dream honeymoon, delayed over and over again. We got married over a month ago, but because of work, we had already postponed the trip several times. We agreed together that we simply wanted to go somewhere where we would have peace from people, technology, and focus only on each other and resting. Damn it, that's like a 4-hour drive. We're going to arrive at night, I said, losing the last bit of my patience. Yes, Liam, I'm just leaving the office. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Did you call the owner to let her know we'll be this late? She asked, clearly irritated. I hesitated, but after a moment I answered, Of course I called. Everything is arranged. Good. Let's not argue. I'll be home soon. I love you, she said, and hung up. A chill ran down my back. In all the stress and chaos, I had forgotten to call Mrs. Sophia. In theory, we were supposed to be there in 20 minutes to pick up the keys. How was I supposed to tell her that we were only just leaving? I started pacing around the living room in panic. You can do this, Liam. She's just an odd lady. Worst case, she yells at you, I said to myself, trying to build myself up. She won't cancel the reservation. The cabin is already paid for. I continued my monologue. All right, I'm calling. Good afternoon, Mrs. Sophia, I said a little too enthusiastically. After a moment of silence, the old woman's voice came through the phone. Hello, are you already here? You see, there's a situation. My wife got held up at work. We're only just leaving, I said uncertainly. Sir, you told me you had a 4-hour drive. It will be after 10 by the time you get here. Why are you calling me only now? I'll already be asleep. I don't leave the house after dark, the old woman said dryly, irritated, and I felt my hands start to sweat. I'm very sorry, ma'am. With all the stress and confusion, I forgot to call earlier. We'll try to get there as quickly as possible. A long silence followed. I sat there on pins and needles. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Hello, Mrs. Sophia? Are you there? I'm here. Come tomorrow morning, the old woman answered firmly. Please have mercy. It's our honeymoon. We only have 1 week off. Every hour is worth its weight in gold to us, I said in a pleading tone. After another pause, she spoke. It would be better for you if you came in the morning, but if that's what you want, I'll leave the key on the porch. Take it, and when you're done with your stay, please leave it in the same place. Thank you so much. You're really saving me. I stopped mid-sentence, realizing the old woman had hung up. I sighed with relief. I knew the cabin owner would be angry, but I didn't expect her to take offense to that extent. Older people are naturally punctual, and apparently that really got under her skin. The doorbell rang, and I nearly jumped, suddenly pulled out of my thoughts. Olivia had arrived finally. On my way to the door, I thought how good it was that I had managed to handle it before she got back. If she found out I hadn't done it earlier, I would have listened the whole drive to her going on about how I rushed her, how I didn't take care of such an important thing, how I lied to her, and who knows what else. So, are we going? I asked, opening the door. Olivia looked at me with a wild smile and answered playfully, I still have to pee. She seemed very excited. We went off. The route went by pretty quickly. We talked trash about Olivia's boss, laughed, joked around. We were simply enjoying free time and the lack of pressure from responsibilities the next day. We should be there in 20 minutes. I can't wait until we arrive, drink some wine and get into bed. I said, grinning from ear to ear. After a moment, I added in a low, lively voice, "You know, and I don't mean sleeping." Olivia giggled with the look of a little troublemaker and said, "Stop it, you goof." "What? It's our honeymoon after all," I said, looking at her and tickling her around the ribs. "What's wrong?" I asked, concerned. Olivia had a frightened expression, wide eyes, and she was pale. After a moment, she answered, "Liam, I think I saw something weird." I looked around. "What did you see?" "Where?" "By the road. It looked like someone was crouching. I think he was completely naked," she said in panic, and I shoved her hands between her knees. I looked in the mirror. I saw nothing there except forest and darkness. "Calm down, baby. You must be exhausted. You imagined it. We're almost in Pineville. I'll grab the keys quickly, and from there it's only a few minutes to our cabin." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her turn her head toward me. "Damn it, Liam, that thing was looking at me." I wrapped my arm around her and pulled her head against my chest. Maybe it was some homeless guy or some sick animal. "Don't worry, you're safe." She nodded and forced a smile, but her eyes were still terrified. A moment later, we arrived at Mrs. Sophia's house. "Wait here a second. I'll be right back," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. I got out of the car and walked onto the property. The keys were lying on the porch with a cheap tourist keychain. I took them and made a step toward the car. Suddenly, from a doghouse I hadn't noticed earlier, a medium-sized dog burst over the wall and charged straight at me. My heart jumped into my throat. I started running. I barely managed to slam the car door shut behind me before the beast reached me. The dog pressed its front paws against the window, barking. I threw the car into reverse and backed out. Jesus, what was that? An old lady could have warned me there was a dog on the property, I said, catching my breath. It clearly improved Olivia's mood. For the rest of the drive to the cabin, she giggled quietly to herself. "We're here. Beautiful spot," I said, turning off the engine and opening the door. Olivia got out right after me and added, "And poorly lit." We took the suitcases and headed toward the vacation cabin. Yeah, there really isn't much light in there. Struggling with the bunch of keys and trying to get away from the keyhole. I managed. We went inside, and the smell of pine wood greeted us. The front door opened into a small hallway with a coat rack. On the right side there was a kitchen made up of a piece with countertop and 3 cabinets beneath it. And on the left side there was a large living room with a couch, a dining table, a fireplace, and stairs leading upstairs. Everything was done in a typical vacation cabin wooden style. I'm exhausted. We'll unpack tomorrow. Can you turn on the heat? It's cold in here, Olivia said, taking off her jacket. Sure, there should be instructions for using the cabin on the counter, I said, setting the suitcase against the wall. I picked up a small notebook and started reading. There were instructions for using the gas stove, turning on hot water in the shower, information on where the breakers were, and at the end, instructions for heating the cabin. I started reading out loud. The cabin is heated only and exclusively by the fireplace. In the woodshed behind the cabin, there is an amount of wood matched to the number of nights booked. It must be chopped into smaller pieces. The small axe and chopping block are next to the woodshed. I quickly scanned the fire starting instructions and read it out loud. Heating the cabin takes 2 to 3 hours. Please do not leave the burning fireplace unattended. I froze. Good luck lighting it, Liam. Tonight you're sleeping downstairs so you can bravely guard the burning fireplace, Olivia said, irritated, dragging her suitcase upstairs. Shocked by that information, I took out my phone and opened the listing. But how only by fireplace? It says here there's electric heating and fireplace heating, I said angrily. I looked out the window. There was no lighting around the cabin at all. How was I supposed to chop that damn wood in the dark? On top of that, if it was 11 p.m, if I started the fireplace now, I wouldn't go to sleep until morning. I changed into sweatpants, lay down on the dusty fabric couch, and covered myself with an equally dusty blanket. I felt scratching in my nose and eyes. Beautiful, tomorrow I'm calling that woman and demanding a partial refund, I said, closing my eyes. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of cabinets slamming and pots banging coming from the kitchen. I opened my eyes and propped myself up on my elbows. Do you have to make that much noise? I asked, slowly getting up from the couch. Olivia, with a sour look on her face, continued taking her anger out on the kitchen equipment, and after a moment replied, "How did the fireplace go?" "Not too great, I guess, because I woke up with a cold nose." "Great place you picked." I theoretically tapped my finger against my forehead. I opened the door and stepped outside. It was definitely warmer than inside. It was May, so the evenings were cold, and apparently nobody had heated this place since the beginning of the season, which left the cabin chilled through. I stretched slowly, looking around the property. I called Olivia, who came over after a moment with an offended expression. I hugged her and said, "Look how beautiful it is here. There's a fire pit, a grill, a big bench, forest all around, and instead of enjoying it, we're arguing for no reason." The listing said there was electric heating, so I'll call the owner in a second and ask, because maybe this fireplace thing is a mistake. I went back inside, opened my call history, and pressed the green call button. "Good morning. Did you arrive?" the old woman asked on the other side of the phone. "Yes, we arrived." "Mrs. Sophia, how do I turn on the electric heat?" I asked. "Electric heat? Didn't you read the instructions? There is no electric heat. There's the fireplace. Unless you mean hot water, then you just have to plug the water heater in the bathroom," she said calmly. "Mrs. Sophia, the listing says there are 2 sources of heating for the cabin, fireplace and electric," I said angry. After a moment of silence, the woman answered, "Well, yes, electric for heating the water and fireplace for the cabin. Did you read the listing? In the additional information from the host, everything is explained." I switched the call to speaker and opened the listing. Sure enough, in the panel on the left side, there was a section labelled Additional Information, and that information was included there. "I didn't read that part," I said, defeated. "Well, that's exactly how it is with you young people these days. All excited, don't read, and then you have complaints. In case you didn't read this part either, if you run out of the wood I assigned to you, you can buy more from me, she said bluntly with a hint of malice in her voice, and hung up. I looked at my phone. I felt heat rush to my head. When I talked to her for the first time, she was a kind, sweet old lady. After the payment, she had turned into a nasty old lady. I took 3 deep breaths, slowly letting the air out of my lungs. I wasn't going to let this trip be ruined. I walked over to Olivia, who was just finishing unpacking our things. Listen, I'm sorry. I checked the listing badly. The details said the heating is only by the fireplace. Oh well, it happens. So, what are we doing? She asked. Maybe you could run into town and do a little shopping, and I'll chop the wood in the meantime, I said, taking her hand. She smiled at me and said, That's a good idea. I'm hungry. Olivia drove off toward town, and I stood there looking at the small stack of wood, wondering how I was supposed to go about it. I set a piece on the chopping block, raised the axe over my head, and swung with all my strength. I missed, and the axe flew down with force, grazing the wood and landing in the ground millimeters from my foot. A cold sweat ran through me. Damn, that was close, I thought, stepping away from the place of my near tragedy to a safe distance. Suddenly, I heard a voice from behind the fence. Hello, what are you doing? An older man was standing there, leaning on the handlebars of a bicycle. Good morning. I'm trying to chop wood, I said, embarrassed. He straightened up and said, amused, First time chopping? You almost said goodbye to your leg. First time. I've never held an axe in my life, I said, walking toward him. The man leaned his bicycle against the fence and stepped onto the property. I'll show you on a few pieces how to do it. Thank you. I'm Liam, I said, holding out my hand. James, he answered shortly, returning the handshake and heading towards the woodshed. The man took the axe in his hand and said, Listen, Liam. Feet apart, aim a little past the centre. Hold the axe firmly and bring your whole body down. The movement should come from your knees. The axe cut through the air, splitting the piece of wood into 2 perfect halves. James looked over at the axe blade, turning it in his hand as he spoke. This little axe is too small for these pieces of wood, so you're going to struggle a bit. Seriously, Sophia couldn't invest a little here if she wants to rent this cabin out to people. Anyway, when did you arrive here? I looked at him, full of admiration. My wife and I arrived last night. James looked at me straight in the eye and grew serious. At night? You arrived after dark? Yeah, that's just how it worked out, I answered, a little thrown off by his sudden change in behaviour. This whole time he had been mostly smiling, and now that icy tone and serious face. The man set the axe down, stood up, and walked towards his bicycle. I have to go. I wish you both luck. Thanks, I called after him, scratching my head. I took the axe in my hand and started chopping. James was right. His instructions made it so even I could do it relatively safely and effectively. What is it with them and arriving after dark? First Mrs. Sophia, now him. I wish you both luck. People here are really strange. I chopped the wood and stacked it next to the fireplace. Why isn't Olivia back yet? I thought, looking at my phone. She had left over an hour ago. The town was only a few minutes away. I opened my contacts and called her. At that same moment, I heard a vibration coming from the kitchen. She hadn't taken her phone. A strange shiver went through me, and I started to worry. I'll walk toward her. Worst case, we'll meet on the way. There's only one road leading here. I locked the door and started down the little road toward town. I had maybe taken 10 steps when I noticed a car approaching in the distance. I felt relief. Well, great, she's coming back. She's going to make fun of me for worrying for no reason, I said, stopping and waving in her direction. She was driving a little too fast. Something was wrong. I looked closer and froze. The front was dented on the right side. The headlight was smashed and the fender was cracked. I started running toward her. She pulled up and got out without turning off the engine. I wanted a call. I forgot to take my phone, she said, sobbing. I quickly wrapped my arms around her. Baby, what happened? I hit a tree. Liam, I saw him again, she said, trembling. A shock ran down my back. Are you hurt? Who did you see? I asked, looking at her. She didn't look injured, but she was completely shaken. She pressed herself tighter against me. I want to go back to our house. We stood like that for a moment. Come on. For now we'll go back to the cabin. You'll tell me everything, okay? I said gently. She nodded and sat down in the passenger seat. The car must have hit the tree at an unlucky angle, which was why the outside damage was so visible, but probably not very hard because the airbag hadn't gone off. I parked the car and we went inside. Olivia sat down on the couch without a word and stared at one point. In the meantime, I made tea and sat down beside her. Baby, please, tell me what happened. What did you see? I said, placing my hand on her shoulder. She started speaking in a trembling voice. I was coming back from town. I was somewhere halfway along the road, and out of the corner of my eye, I noticed some kind of shadow between the trees. She sniffed, and tears ran down her cheek. I thought it was some kind of animal, but a little further down, that thing suddenly appeared on the road. I saw it literally for a split second. It was crouched, unnaturally hunched over and staring at me. I closed my eyes and hit the brakes. The car went into a tree. I was scared. I wanted to call you. When I opened my eyes, there was nothing there. I went cold. That thing again. What's going on here? Could these be hallucinations caused by too much stress and exhaustion? Finally looking for a way out? I thought, worried. Sweetheart, it must have been some animal, I said, trying to comfort her. But inside, I felt a fear myself, not because of some imaginary creature, but because I was worried about Olivia. We sat like that for a while longer. I managed to convince her to stay, and I promised that if needed, I would be the one driving into town. Olivia needed this vacation. She had to rest, and I would do everything I could to make that happen. We ate breakfast and drank coffee outside. To improve her mood, I told her about my adventure with the axe and the older man. I left out the ending to her strange behaviour so I wouldn't stress her out more. I even managed to make her laugh a little. The day passed pretty quickly. It was genuinely pleasant. We spent most of it outside, enjoying the sun and the charm of the place. It was getting close to 6 p.m. and it slowly started getting dark. We went back inside. Olivia started making dinner, and I lit the fireplace and took out the wine glass. The previous evening hadn't gone well. I hoped this one would be different. We ate in a pleasant atmosphere, enjoying the wine and the warmth coming from the fireplace. The fire slowly started dying down, so I suggested going to the bedroom. Olivia went to take a shower, and I sat on the couch, finishing the last sip from my glass. Unfortunately, the shower stall was too small for the two of us. After 15 minutes, she came out, and a cloud of steam rolled out of the bathroom. I stepped into the shower base, turned on the water, and shouted, "Damn it with this cabin!" A stream of cold water shot from the shower head, pouring over my head and the rest of my body. The hot water must have run out, I thought, looking at the small electric water heater. After my unplanned cold shower, I went up the wooden stairs and crossed into the bedroom. I looked at Olivia. She was lying on her side. I slowly lay down beside her and realized she was asleep. I was a little disappointed. I had hoped for a somewhat more intimate evening, but I understood she had to be exhausted. She had gone through a lot of stress and emotions today. I put my head on the pillow and fell asleep. I woke up with a dry, slightly scratchy feeling in my throat. I slowly opened my eyes and sleepily glanced toward the window. It was dark outside. I need to drink some water. I must have made the fireplace too hot and dried out the air, I thought, glancing at my phone. 3:40. I looked toward the other side of the bed. The place where Olivia had been sleeping was empty. Maybe she went to the bathroom, or also went to get something to drink, I thought, but I felt that something was wrong. It was too quiet. I sat still for a moment. A huge wave of anxiety passed through me, and I felt my stomach tighten. I couldn't hear any footsteps or any other sound. I quickly got out of bed and went downstairs. Standing halfway down the stairs, I froze, and my heart beat harder. The door to the outside was open, and Olivia was nowhere to be seen. Masks. Many people experience things in their youth that haunt them until the afflicted man or woman finally comes to pass. Often they are soldiers, first responders, or blue-collar workers that witness terrible accidents or crimes during work. Sometimes they are children, a girl who lost her father too soon, or a boy forced to shoulder great responsibility from a young age. Perhaps they witnessed a great tragedy or an unstoppable force of nature. These things are grisly in their own right, true as they are awful. Those who suffer from the supernatural are not so known, however. Those who suffer from the supernatural often do not reveal their plight, and often when they do, they are heckled and betrayed. Taken less seriously than anybody else. I too have heckled a poor individual with supernatural claims, or a person I thought crazy for seeing ghosts or spirits. For a long time I thought them all to be lies and fakes, simply bored people who touted false messages to serve some narrative. This belief came to pass when I was 17 years old, and I experienced a great tragedy of my own, staining my life with a dark shadow that was never truly left. I knew Kenda was a small town, even as a child, until I was 9. I lived in Detroit, a city that my mother hated. It was easy for me to understand this even in my young age, as my mother spared no breath in yelling this to my father mere minutes after I was sent to bed. We had thin walls in that house. On more than one occasion, either one of my parents would come into my room with talk of moving, though they never talked about it together with me. As an adult, I now know why. At first, I quite disliked the idea of moving, but as the wedge between my parents sunk deeper, I came around to the idea. As a kid, you don't really understand what moving means for your life or future. But it was after a particularly hot summer that my mother came home one day and filled her car with both my things and hers. She asked if I was ready to move away from Detroit. For the end of that week, I was in an entirely new town, somewhere vastly different than the bustling city I knew. It was a small town called Kendra, and if you ever have been to South Dakota, you might know that it was tiny, even by a Midwestern standard. For example, when I was a freshman in high school, my graduating class was only about 50, and my graduating class was smaller than that, being around only 30 students. The town itself was greatly aware of its small size and tried very hard to grow during the time I lived there. There were plenty of local clubs and organizations, and often the churches would donate money in order to construct stores or other businesses. Our only floral shop had been built by the Baptists next door and was sold to the florist at a very modest price. In a big city, elementary schools are often multiple floors, with dozens of classrooms for each grade, with a great playground out back and an expansive parking lot out front. Even if this was not the case for every school, there was bound to be one mere streets away that was like this. In Kenda, however, this was not, and still is not, the case. The only elementary school anywhere near the town was a small single-story building that smelled of dust and mildew. The building itself was super old, and though it is hard to remember, I think there were only 3 classrooms for each grade, so about 20 in the whole school. This bothered me when I was young, as I was rather as studious as a boy. I figured that this school could not possibly compare to my other school, and I was worried that I wouldn't like my new teacher. Then came the matter of friends. I wasn't sure I'd find anybody willing to be friends with me, so throughout my first day in Kenda, I kept to myself, electing to be the shy new kid, hoping someone would come to talk to me. That day, I had a few people ask where I was from or what I liked, but it still felt awkward. I was in a new town, and I had just left the only one I'd ever known in Detroit. It was later that day that I took my things from my cubby and walked outside to see about half a dozen big yellow school buses parked in the lot. I found the one my mother had told me to take and stepped aboard past the driver, a large man with a beard named Mr. Wick. He eyed me in the mirror that views the aisle as I walked past dozens of seats already filled. Unfamiliar faces looked at me as I walked, though nearly every seat already had 2 passengers. I reached the end of the bus without finding somewhere to sit, and Mr. Wick gave me an annoyed expression from where he sat. Just as I thought the driver would yell at me to sit down, a boy with tan skin and a green button scooted over in his seat. "Hey, come on," he said as he patted the seat next to him. Relieved, I sat next to him, but tried not to sit too close. I guess we were the same age, but in different classes based on the size. "Thanks," I said quietly, happy to have found a seat, but feeling awkward this close to a stranger. "My name's Hugh. What's yours?" he asked. "Nick." For the remainder of that ride, Hugh seemed to sense my apprehension and allowed me to keep my space. That remained until we reached a stop at the end of a long dirt road that eventually led to my house, and both of us stood up from our seats. I didn't think anything of it and started to walk to my new home, but Hugh trailed behind me for some time. "Are you new here?" he asked from behind. "Yeah." "That's cool. We never get new kids here." "I was new too, but that was 2 years ago," he said. Curious, I turned to look at him. "Where did you live before you moved?" I asked. "This place called Nome. It's in Alaska." I had only heard of Alaska one other time, and I imagined you going to school and reading books in an igloo, something which a childish me thought was common. "That's cool," I said, trying to seem cool myself. "I'm from Detroit. It's this really big city." "I've never been to a big city before," said Hugh. We continued to walk for some time, talking about childish interests and telling stories from our old schools. That was until we reached a 4-way junction in the road, and I knew to turn left. I hoped Hugh would too, but he turned right. This, however, is not the last I would see of the boy, and that was the start of our years-long friendship. For the next few weeks, Hugh and I ate lunch together, played at recess together, and the years that we were lucky enough to be in the same class, we studied together too. On many occasions, I found myself at his house, which my mother appreciated since she often had to travel for work, often for long periods at a time. When I was in 6th grade, I asked my mother if I could start playing hockey, which she allowed only after I explained that Hugh's mother offered to drive me to and from practice, which Hugh also attended. During my years following my move to Kenda, I became very close with Hugh's family, especially his older brother Scotty. Mrs. and Mr. Jacobs had 3 kids, all boys. The oldest was Scotty, and he was the middle child. But they had a younger son named Tuck, whom I didn't interact with much until high school. His mother Vera was nice, though even as a kid I thought she was rather odd. Once she gave me a thorny stick called Devil's Club and told me to put it above my front door to prevent bad spirits from coming in. When I came home that day, my mother obliged, but promptly suggested that Vera was a nut. One Christmas, Vera gave my mother a gift, but when she opened it, there were half a dozen dried fish tails and instructions to hang them above doors and windows. My mother refused, but never told Vera, and I was okay with this because I thought they smelled weird. Odd as she was, I certainly preferred Vera over Hugh's dad, Petey. He was reservant, but very strict. On most days, he would spend hours on end in his workshop, only leaving to lecture us kids on what was allowed and what wasn't, never forgetting to rudely eye me as if he thought I was some sort of rule breaker. We were never allowed in his shop without supervision, but that was likely due to the many machines and tools that lay strewn about. Us boys didn't mind, as we figured all the shop was good for anyway was sharpening skates and gluing old sticks back together. We were never allowed in the attic either, per Petey's instructions, though I sensed Vera enforced this rule too. Hugh and I never minded though, as Tuck and Scotty went up there once and came back down saying it was used only for storage. Even though Tuck was 2 years younger than me, Scotty was 2 years older, and this made his word reliable. The attic was a rare object of thought in my mind, as the many abandoned buildings and structures around town offered much more adventure. One day in the late summer, when I had freshly turned 17, Hugh and I were alone at his house, something which didn't happen often. From what I remember, Vera and Petey had taken Tuck to the town over for a doctor's appointment, and Scotty had gone to spend the night at his girlfriend's house. We did what little homework we had and made some food that wasn't great, but after a half hour of boredom, Hugh suggested something I hadn't expected. "You want to see what's in the attic?" he asked. I took a moment to answer. This caught me off guard. "I thought your dad hid the key," I answered, hoping to divert the conversation. He shrugged. "Yeah, but Tuck found it the other day when he was looking for a spare cord for the Super Nintendo." I sighed, though I was curious to see what was in the attic. I was conflicted about breaking the rules, which he had clearly defined so many times. "Fine, but just for a few minutes," I said. Hugh got up from the couch and walked into his kitchen. After a few minutes, he returned with a bronze key in his hand, smiling as he made his way down the hall with me in tow. I never considered before why it was that we weren't allowed in the attic, but when I thought about it, I couldn't find any believable reason why. If it was simply for storage, why was Petey so stern in his ruling? I shook my head, figuring my questions would be answered soon. He put the key in the lock and turned. I thought that when the door opened, that my nerves would subside, though they only grew when I saw the curious sight on the other side. The door that Hugh opened led into a narrow stairwell with rickety wooden steps atop, which sat at a particularly weathered door with peeling paint. We knew that Hugh's house was old, but most areas never showed it. We figured it was built in the 50s or 60s, but nobody in the family was quite sure. We figured that's why the door looked so beat up with its dripping paint and tarnished bronze handle, but that was hardly the strangest thing about the stairwell. Weird, Hugh said as he pointed a finger above his head, but I was already looking at what he was pointing to. Canopying over the entirety of the stairwell were dozens of dried fishtails and sprigs of devil's club, all suspended by strings, dangling gently as they swayed. Needless to say, this gave me an awful feeling. "Come on, man, I think we should go," I said. Hugh gave me a look that told me that he thought I was in. "Dude," was all he said. "Those are supposed to ward off bad spirits. Mum tells us all the time." "Come on, man. My mum's a nut. Even your mum says that." I rolled my eyes. My mother was hardly a reliable source. Your mum clearly thinks something's up in the attic. That's why your dad always says not to go in there, I argued. "Oh right, yeah. There's an 8-foot tall demon in there, and fishtails are stopping it," I said sarcastically. "I've lived in this house for years. It's nothing to be worried about. Scotty says it's just used for storage anyway." After thinking for a moment, I relented, knowing that Hugh would go by himself if I chose to leave. "Okay, fine, but we're just looking around for a few seconds." As soon as the words set my lips, Hugh started up the rickety stairs, not once turning an eye to the odd decorations that hung above our heads. I followed behind, and when we reached the top, he set his hands on the tarnished bronze handle and turned. What lay on the other side of the door was not an 8-foot tall demon or a monster of any sort, but instead were dozens of cardboard boxes and plastic totes. Sunlight peeked in through the small windows that were set on either side of the attic, illuminating the dust that invaded every part of the air, shedding light onto the stacks of boxes and storage containers stacked along the wall. On the other side of the room hung a large curtain, and Hugh and I both approached it, wondering why it hung. It divided the room in two, but when we came close it became obvious that it wasn't a curtain at all, but a simple white bed sheet tacked to the ceiling, used as a makeshift divider. I thought about pulling it aside to see what was beyond it, but I hesitated, and Hugh pulled it open instead. In the darkness behind it was an empty area, populated by only a single box, taped closed with the large black letters on its side, sitting alone. "Input items. Do not open," it read. At that time, I was unfamiliar with the word, and I didn't know who the input people were. Curious at the lone box, we approached it slowly, trying not to disturb the silence that hung over the room. I was apprehensive about looking into the box, and I knew Hugh was too, but for curious kids, a mystery was so easily accessible was hard to turn down. We both came close, and Hugh took a pocket knife in his hand and then cut the packaging tape that held the box closed. Without saying anything, he opened the flaps and took out only a single item. I looked into the box as well, and saw that the item was the box's only inhabitant. Hugh held a bundle of patterned cloth about the size of a basketball, clearly wrapped around a smaller item, likely fragile. We both looked at it for a few moments, and I wondered if he got the same sinister feeling from the bundle that I did. That's when the sound of Scotty's car door closing made its way to the attic, and we knew then to leave. Quickly, we descended the staircase and locked it behind us just as Scotty got up to the second floor with an irritated look on his face. He explained how he and the father of his girlfriend got into an argument and the mean old man kicked him out. Luckily, he didn't seem to suspect anything. For a while, the mysterious box and cloth-wrapped item came up frequently into conversations between Hugh and I, though neither of us ever found the time or the nerve to go into the attic and unwrap it. After a few weeks, the cloth-wrapped item worked its way back out of our conversations. That was until one night in October when the captain of our hockey team threw a party. Naturally, Hugh and I were both invited, so around 9 at night we borrowed Scotty's car since my truck didn't have a backseat, and we took Puck along with us to the house of Jeremy Liddon. The Liddon family was well known and respected around town, as Randall Liddon, Jeremy's dad, owned the gun store on Cotton Street, and his wife was a clerk at the elementary school. Jeremy is the youngest of 4, though his older sisters had all moved out by this time. Naturally, the home was big, and since it was nearly a mile away from the nearest neighbour, this made it the best spot for parties when Jeremy's parents were out of town. As soon as we arrived, there were dozens of cars parked in front of the house, and partygoers both inside and out. We found a spot to leave our car where we were certain it wouldn't get hit, and went inside. Drinks had clearly been flowing for some time, and the smell of burning weed floated from the garage into every other room of the house. Tuck split from Hugh and I as soon as we entered the Liddon house, presumably to go find friends to talk to. Familiar with these sorts of parties, Hugh and I found ourselves drinks and sat on the living room couch and watched the NHL return. That was already on. We sat for a while watching the game and drinking, and the party passed the way they always did. Angsty teens drank more than they should, which led to the same bad decisions we watched our parents make for years. For a short few minutes, we were pulled from the TV to witness a fight between 2 kids in the junior varsity. It was a short and anticlimactic scene. After this, it seemed like there was something on Hugh's mind, and he finally said what it was. Remember that cloth thing we saw in the attic? He asked with a slur. I nodded and attempted to force my vision to focus. I saw what it was a few days ago, he said. My nose crinkled and my brow furrowed with purpose. I couldn't believe we went back up there without him. What was it? I asked. Hugh sighed and took a moment to answer. It was this freaky looking mask with one face inside, another with hair and fur all over. His answer reminded me of the Fishtails and Devil's Club, and wondered if it was related. You saw it without me? I asked. I don't know, man. I just wanted to see what was in the box, he said. This irritated me more than it should have. Annoyed, I decided not to continue our conversation as I knew Hugh didn't react well to anger. For a while longer, we continued to drink and watch hockey, while Tuck and other rowdy individuals continued some of the wildest aspects of the party in Jeremy's garage. Eventually, he emerged with red eyes and an awkward demeanour, explaining he was ready to go home. It was then that I realised we had never decided who our driver would be. I suspected Tuck of smoking, but I knew Hugh was in no state to drive. I tried to stop them from leaving, saying we should call Scotty's girlfriend, Gina, or some other friend of ours, but Tuck insisted he was sober. Regrettably, I believed him. I elected to stay at the party for longer, as there was a cute blonde girl that I had been eyeing occasionally throughout the evening. I had never seen her before, and I hoped that after my friends left, that I knew I would have the chance to speak with her. At that time, I was good friends with Jeremy, and I knew I would be able to crash on his couch that night, so there was no rush for me to return home. After bidding farewell to Jeremy and some other partygoers, Tuck took the keys from Hugh, and both of them left along with Kenny Sula, the team goalie, who had also happened to be their neighbour. The door closed behind the boys as they left, and it also almost sounded louder than normal, as if it was cementing their departure. I watched the headlights leave the driveway, then drunkenly stood from my seat on the couch as I approached the girl that had caught my attention. "Hey, you new in town?" I asked, though I knew the answer. The girl laughed. "Sort of," she said. "I'm Nancy Liddon, Jeremy's cousin." I nodded, but I knew my expressions showed surprise. Jeremy didn't talk about his family much. "What are you doing here in Kenda?" I asked. "Oh, I'm just here for a few weeks to see if I like the place," she said. By the way she spoke, I got some sense that something about her home life wasn't stable. I nodded understandingly, knowing mine wasn't stable either. "Well, there's not much around here, but also plenty to like," I joked. Nancy's thin lips cracked into a smile. "Like what?" I thought for a few moments, searching for an answer that was charismatic, but not too bold. "Well, the school's nice, and the town's sort of charming," I answered, hoping I didn't sound like a nerd. "Charming?" she asked. "I don't know about that. It seems kind of dull here." "Some people like dull things," I answered, definitely sounding like a nerd. "So, you play hockey too?" she asked in a change of subject. "Are you any good?" For a moment I thought about what I should answer, but things were going well with Nancy, so my confidence grew. "I'm pretty good, but maybe you should come to a game and see for yourself," I suggested. To my surprise, Nancy agreed, and we spent another 15 minutes talking to each other in the kitchen as the attendees of her cousin's party started to filter out. Eventually, Jeremy found us both in the kitchen and nodded with a knowing smile. "That's my boy," he hollered loudly as he patted my back. Embarrassed, I brushed his hand off. "Dude, come on," I said, hoping this would stop his odd behaviour. Nancy just laughed. It was then that Jeremy's landline rang, as he walked in between us both, rubbing his face in an attempt to force himself sober. "Liddon House?" he said as he picked up the receiver. For a few moments he said nothing, but his breathing became irregular. I saw a subtle shift in his expression as whoever was calling spoke, and his face grew to worry. "Nancy, you need to take us to the hospital," he said as he dropped the phone. letting the receiver dangle over the side of the counter. I knew immediately that something had gone terribly wrong, and though I thought I knew what it was, I refused to believe it. For a few minutes, he didn't give any details and refused to say what had happened, but both Nancy and I understood this urgency and didn't press him. Just as Nancy's driver's side door closed, Jeremy looked at me in the back seat, wearing an expression that said what I needed to know. His mouth struggled to find the words he wanted to say, and I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he explained that it was Kenny Sewer who called. Luckily, he owned a cell phone at the time, which he used to call Jeremy through pained breaths and panicked tears. He, Tuck, and Hugh had been driving when another driver refused to dial down his high beams. Through that and in Tuck's state, the boys were sucked into a ditch on the side of the road, and then through a farmer's barbed wire fence. Apparently Kenny didn't share details on the state of Hugh and Tuck, though to say this, I'm unsure if that was true or if it was a lie made on Jeremy's part in order to spare my emotions. We took a long and sobering 2-hour ride to the nearest town with a fully functioning hospital, and it occurred to us that we weren't sure how to find our friends in the last construction that was Willowville General. Anxiously, we departed from Jeremy's car and entered the hospital with our hearts in our throat and shaking hands. We asked the receptionist where we could find our friends, and she looked at us with a grim expression when we did. We were directed to a hall on the second floor, but said she wasn't sure if the doctors would let us see Kenny or Tuck. "What about Hugh?" Jeremy asked, but the woman didn't answer. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he yelled angrily. My heart fell at the woman's silence, and I knew that something terrible had happened to Hugh. Even all these years later, that moment still doesn't feel real. Both Nancy and I tried to calm Jeremy down, but alcohol still lingered on his breath and in his system. Worried, I left them both and started down the hall to the elevator. I went down to the second floor as I passed tired doctors and angry nurses, crying mothers and anxious partners, all in the emergency section of a hospital 100 miles away from my home. When I reached room 208, I nearly ran into a doctor who closed the door as I reached it, and he stopped me from going inside. From what I gathered in the minutes that followed, Hugh was in a coma and paralysed from the waist down well before the ambulance made it to Willowville General. His skull had been fractured, as had his neck, and multiple teeth were missing. During the crash, Tuck's arm had been broken and dislocated, and though he was alive, he certainly wasn't well. His face was covered in lacerations and brutal scrapes, though doctors said he would recover fully within the year. Kenny fared the best between the three boys, as he was sitting in the back seat, and he was spared most of the injuries that came with the wreck, but I didn't try to see him that night. I told Jeremy and Nancy to leave me in Willowville, and at first they both protested. However, after I insisted, Nancy relented. She took my hand in hers and squeezed compassionately, and even though she didn't know me well, she seemed to sympathize. She wrote her number on a napkin from her pocket in blue pen and told me to call if I needed anything, though I knew I wouldn't. After her and Jeremy left, I slowly walked to a payphone across the street, trying to figure out how I would tell Vera and Petey what had happened. I thought that my footsteps were too fast, so I deliberately slowed down to allow myself more time to think. But when I reached the phone, it was all the same. I called once and nobody picked up. But when I called again, Petey's voice answered in a grumble. "Petey, it's Nick," I said flatly. "What do you want?" he grumbled. I understood his annoyance. It was nearly 1 a.m. I sighed, and my breaths were unsteady as I chose my words carefully. "I don't know how to tell you this, so I'm just going to say it. Me, Tuck, and Hugh went to a party and they drove back without me. Later, Jeremy Liddon got a call from Kenny Sewer, who was riding with them, saying they've wrecked the car. I'm in Willowville at the hospital. Jeremy's cousin drove me." For a while, there was silence, and I thought it would never end, but I knew Petey was on the other side, speechless at my words. "And my boys?" he asked after an eternity. I had my own moment of silence, wondering if it was better to tell him or let him see for himself. I had no idea. If it was best to tell him, how could I possibly say it? I sighed, apparently loud enough for Petey to hear. "Nicholas, answer me," he demanded. His voice wasn't loud or raised, simply defeated at my lack of answers. "They're alive," I finally said. "I'll be outside when you get here." I hung up after that promise. I sat on the sidewalk outside the hospital, leaning against the wall. I watched cars pull into and leave the parking lot, and many other cars simply drove past. I woke up nearly 2 hours later with my nose cold and face red from the chilly air as Vera shook me by my shoulders with tears in her eyes. I didn't know what to say, and as I looked into her sparkling blue eyes, I felt as if I had failed her. Why didn't I stop Tuck from driving? What had I done? After a long time in the hospital, Vera drove me back to Kenda, telling me it wasn't my fault and that she was glad I was safe. The whole time I stared out the window, wishing I'd perished at that very moment. No matter what she said, I thought I could have done something, and her reassurance of faultlessness made me feel like shit. For the next few days, I sat at home, skipping school and lazing around without an aim. More than once, I thought about driving to Willowville, but I figured I couldn't handle the silence of a 2-hour drive. Once I dug through my pocket, I found the napkin with Nancy's number, and I thought to ask if she'd come with me. Then I thought against it, wishing not to bother her any more with what had happened. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, knowing I had put her through enough. At one point, Vera invited me to dinner, but I didn't go. Scotty was out of town when it happened, and now that he was back from Iowa, he didn't know how I'd ever be able to face him again. After all, I had let both his brothers nearly die. I didn't like the thought, but I wondered if their behavior was false. Vera had always been nice, but how could she still look at me so kindly? Was it simply a mask? And if it was, how could I really face her either? I thought about masks a lot those days. About 2 weeks after it happened, I finally dragged myself to school for that week. It was awful. I was tired and exhausted and wanted nothing more than to go to class, then to go to practice, then go to home. but in the small halls of Kenda Senior High School felt like all eyes were prying and all ears were listening. So many people asked me how I was doing or what happened, but nobody really cared. They all wore masks of care, of compassion. They only asked because that's what you're supposed to do when a tragedy occurs. I walked around like a zoo animal that week because bad news spreads faster than wildfire in a small town. One night towards the end of that week, I was up late watching a movie, though I wasn't really watching it. About halfway through, I watched more intently though, and I found myself becoming increasingly interested in the lead actress. Her hair was amazing, long and black with dark curls that bounced when she moved. And I realised then that I had never found hair so interesting before. Then came a sound from outside. Curious, I stood from the couch and peered out the living room window to see nothing but darkness. For a moment I stood and thought, wondering what it could have been and if it was worth investigating at all. A harsh windstorm had been attacking the town for the past couple days, and I figured it was nothing. I started to sit back down, but as I did, there came another sound. This one was quieter and slight, but it was unmistakable. The sound of boots on gravel came from outside my house, light as if whoever was there was trying to remain quiet. After a couple seconds, there was yet another sound, this one of my front door being tried. I stood up fast and quietly walked towards the door, hoping not to be heard. I was never one to leave the door unlocked, especially when my mother was out of town. I also kept a weapon near the door when she was gone, so with my left hand I set my handle on the knob as I wrapped my hand around the old hockey stick I kept next to it. I considered my actions for a brief moment, wondering if there was some blood-crazed killer or drugged-up robber on the other side. Then I flung the door open. Harsh winds beat against my chest, and my clothes fluttered in the gusts that attacked my property. But all that sat in my yard was my gravel driveway and early snow that had yet to melt. Weeds swayed in the darkness, great blonde strands of foliage that danced in the wind like hair fluttering. The darkness cast shadows within it, and for a second I thought whoever was there may be hiding in them. Then the wind blew again, as if to say, "Nothing here," and the weeds parted to reveal nothing but empty space between them. I thought I might have been hearing things, but then I shook my head. Of course I wasn't hearing things. I walked around my house to the back, repeatedly looking at the weeds that were rough and brittle blonde locks swaying in the weather, moving with the trees that shook violently far above the ground. Again, there was nothing, and nobody stood where I could see them, though I still felt eyes on me. Scared, without a proper way to find my watcher, I walked back towards the front door, passing something peculiar on my way. In the late autumn, snow often descends upon the Midwest, and Kenda was no exception. Usually these snowfalls attack, then retreat, melting before winter truly begins. This happens multiple times a year, where the light snowfalls arrive then melt, and it always takes multiple times before the snow stays for good. Often these early snows do not melt entirely, and I leave ice and a hard pack in their wake. My yard was always especially cold, so snow and ice stuck around longer than usual, which was likely the reason why I saw it. Beneath my living room window, there were two footprints in size larger than my own and pressed into the hard pack. They stood with their toes pointed towards the window, as if they were looking at me as I rested on the couch. Unnerved, I went back inside and ensured my windows and doors were all locked. I didn't sleep much that night. 4 days into a blizzard, something knocked on my cabin door. It looked like a college kid. It wasn't. The blizzard was supposed to last 2 days. Then 2 became 3. Then I was on day 4, holed up in my cabin. The only thing I could see outside was the snow, a white, shifting void that obscured the rest of the mountain range. I looked for the stars out of habit, but they were gone, buried behind layers of storm. The sky was black, thick with cloud and snow and the night. The tree line, usually clear, was faint now. A smudge of darkness barely separated nature from the cabin. The thick snow blurred the edges, turning trees into shadows that shifted with the wind of what had once been a sharp, familiar boundary was now lost in the white of the snow and darkness of the night. I was steady, at least. Before the storm hit, I'd driven down the mountain to the nearby town to stock up on supplies like I always do. I filled my good old F-150 with food, water, and anything else I might need to ride out of the worst of it. Back at the clearing of the cabin, I chopped firewood. I've already got enough stacked to last through a second ice age, but it gives me something to do, something to break up the quiet, all aspects of it, the rhythmic thunk of the axe hitting the wood, the smell of fresh pine, the way the pile grows bigger with every swing. It all keeps me from thinking too much. I don't get visitors. That's not me being dramatic. It's just fact. The nearest neighbour is a 40-minute drive down the mountain, and that's when the roads are clear, which they're not, haven't been for days. That's why, when I heard a knock, I damn near dropped the mug of cocoa I was holding. It wasn't loud, just 2 slow, deliberate raps on the door. Then nothing. I stood there in the kitchen for a few seconds, just listening, waiting to hear it again. The storm was still going strong outside, but underneath the wind, the silence settled again, like a blanket. Neither a knock nor a voice calling out followed. I figured I imagined it. Cabin fever and all that wouldn't be the first time. But I walked to the door anyway. Something in me wouldn't let it go. Could have been curiosity, or maybe I was just so goddamn starved for company that I wanted there to be someone out there. I opened the door, and there he was. A kid in his early 20s maybe. He could have passed for a college student if he wasn't half frozen. His face was pale as paper, lips blue, eyes wide and glassy like he wasn't all there. Snow clung to his coat in heavy clumps, and he was shaking so hard his teeth were clacking together. "God," I said before I even thought about it. He didn't answer, didn't even look at me, just stood there, trembling in the doorway like he didn't know where he was. I should have hesitated. I should have asked what he was doing out in a blizzard, who he was, how he got up here, but I didn't. If I closed the door and he died out there, I'd never be able to live with myself. That part of me, the part that used to be a husband, the part that could have been a father one day, is still there somewhere, even if it's quieter now. "Come in," I said. "Come on, let's get you warm." He stepped inside without a word. The wind slammed the door shut behind him. He left a trail of melting snow behind him as I led him to the fire. His boots were soaked through. I had him sit on the old armchair by the hearth while I threw a couple logs on and got the flames high. I asked if he was hurt. He didn't answer. "Can you talk?" I tried again. "Tell me your name?" Still nothing. Just that 1,000-yard stare, like he was looking through the fire past it, like he saw something there I couldn't. He looked like hell, skin pale and tight over the bone, lips cracked, nose bleeding just a little from the cold. I knelt down beside him to check for frostbite, and that's when I saw it. On his side, just below the ribs, his jacket torn, his shirt soaked with blood, was a wound, a deep bite, ragged, raw, and already turning dark around the edges. It wasn't new, a day old, maybe more. The skin around it was red and hot. "You didn't say you were bit," I muttered, more to myself than to him. He flinched when I touched it. First reaction I'd gotten out of him. His eyes snapped to mine, wild, just for a second. Then they went vacant again. It didn't look like a wolf bite. I've seen those before. Hell, I've seen worse. Back when I hunted more often. Wolves tear, rip, pull. This was cleaner. Too clean. I patched it up as best as I could. Cleaned it. Wrapped gauze tight around his ribs. He winced, but didn't make a sound. Just watched me, breathing shallow, like a concerned animal. After that, I set him up in the guest room. It had a bed, a thick blanket, and a space heater in the corner. He didn't say a word, and just laid down, curled in on himself, eyes still wide open. I left him there, closed the door gently behind me. The cabin felt smaller after that, like he brought something in with him. A weight, a shift in the air. I tried to shake it. I made myself tea, sat by the fire, and held a book in my lap I didn't read. I checked in on him an hour later. He was asleep, out cold. No fever, at least none I could feel. I left the door cracked, just in case. I must have nodded off at some point. The fire was down to coals when I woke up, house quiet as the grave. I could hear the wind screaming against the windows, the old trees creaking out front, but nothing inside. No footsteps, no coughing, no movement from the guest room. I was just about to check again when I heard the floorboard creak. He was standing in the hall, just watching me. "Fuck," I said, nearly spilling my tea. He blinked slow, looked around like he wasn't sure where he was. "Sorry," he said, voice hoarse, dry. "Didn't mean to scare you." "It's all right," I said. "You're lucky to be alive. What the hell are you doing up here?" He scratched at his bandage. "Hiking," he said, "with my girlfriend, Emma." I waited. "We were camping in the woods yesterday. No, a few nights before. Got caught in the storm. We thought we'd hunker down, ride it out." He stopped, his jaw tightened. "We heard something," he said, "outside the tent. I thought it was wolves. Big ones. We stayed quiet, didn't move, but it didn't matter. They crawled through the side." He swallowed hard, eyes wet now, but not crying. I ran. I didn't even see what they looked like, just teeth. It was wrong. Too many of them. Emma screamed, and then his voice broke off. "You didn't see her after that?" He shook his head. "I ran until I couldn't. Then I saw your cabin. You're safe now, kid. Just rest." He nodded, turned and walked back to the guest room like he was sleepwalking. I tried going back to sleep, even poured myself another mug of cocoa, just to have something warm in my hands. But the air felt heavy in me, like it was pressing in on me, 1 inch at a time. Sometime after midnight, I heard the floor creak. I glanced up, expecting to see him again, maybe wandering the hall, confused. But there was no one, just the faint sound of the bathroom door clicking shut at the end of the hall. The light spilled out in a thin line under the frame. I waited. 5 minutes, then 10. The pipes groaned once, a long, low exhale, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. Then I heard gasping. I walked to the bathroom and cleared my throat, loud enough for him to hear. No response. "You alright in there?" Still nothing. Steam started seeping out from under the door, slow and cooling, clogging the floor like smoke. It looked on, not sharp and white like the shower usually gives off. This was thicker, heavier, grey around the edges, like breath fogged on glass. I stood outside for another minute, then stepped closer, pressed my knuckles to the door, and knocked once, gently. "You hear me, son?" Silence, not even the shuffle of movement. No cough, no running water. The wood felt cold beneath my hand, not warm like it should be with steam coming through, just still and dead and cold. I leaned in, pressed my ear to the door, listened. Nothing. Every instinct in me said, "Walk away, let it be." The boy had been through hell. Maybe he needed time. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he just broke the mirror by accident. Maybe I was imagining things again. But my gut had gone cold, and it wasn't from the storm. I wrapped my hand around the knob. It was slick with condensation. I turned it slowly, quiet as I could, until the latch gave way with a soft click. Then, holding my breath, I gently opened the door. What I saw shook me. The kid was split open vertically, down the middle, bisected with a horrific precision that ran from the crown of his head, through his nose, mouth, and sternum, all the way down to his groin. The bathroom looked like a butcher's block. The tiled flood underneath was stained with something dark and moist. His two halves rested on the floor like broken mannequins, separated by a sickening foot of space. Ribs, stark white and splintered, jutted like snapped fences. Muscles, still glistening and unnervingly pink, hung in strips. The coiled lengths of intestine and the dull, spilled organs lay exposed and motionless on the floor. Some still clinging to one half of the body. There was an emptiness where his spine should have been, a hollowed-out canyon running through his core. It was as if something massive had forced its way out from the inside. The precision of the split through bone and gristle was alien. Wrong. Then through the haze of the shook, a draft hit me, a bone-deep cold that had nothing to do with the storm outside. My eyes were still wide and unfocused, slowly tracked it. The small bathroom window, usually sealed tight against the mountain air, was shattered. Not just cracked, but exploded outward as if something had exited through it. Jagged shards of glass glittered on the sill and floor. The fierce wind howled through the gap, bringing it with it a stinging spray of snow. And from the half of the young man's body that was closer to the window, a trail began. A glistening, repulsive path of black and dark red slime snaked across the pristine white tiles, past the gurgling toilet, over the shattered glass and through the broken window frame, disappearing into the white void of the blizzard. I thought it was blood, but it was thick, vicious, and seemed to pulsate faintly in the dim light, leaving an oily sheen in its wake. Whatever had been inside him, whatever had ripped him apart and then fled, had left this horrifying signature. I finally found my breath. It was a cold, panicked gasp that tasted of iron and the strange stink coming off the floor. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the split halves of the black and red trail that snaked across the tiles. Every instinct screamed for me to run, not down the mountain, I'd never make it, but away from this room at least. It was out there now, something that hid inside a man, then discarded the skin to crawl through a broken window into a night that would kill anything normal. The thought of it sliding down the mountain, of it reaching the small defenseless town I'd just driven through days ago, made adrenaline surge through paralysis. It couldn't make it to town, not on my watch. My feet moved before my brain gave the order. I didn't bother closing the bathroom door. The horror had already escaped. I moved past the living room, where the cozy glow of the dying fire felt like a cruel joke, and into the master bedroom. I went straight to the closet, tucked behind my winter gear. Right where I kept it was a Remington 870. I pulled it out, the cold steel of the pump action, a familiar weight in my hands. I grabbed the box of double-aught buckshot from the shelf, spilling a handful of crimson shells onto the carpet, but I didn't stop to pick them up. I loaded the shotgun quickly, the sharp, metallic shick, shick, shick of the shells cutting through the roar of the wind. It had been years since I pointed a gun at anything that wasn't a deer. But looking at the slick, dark trail leading out of my house, I knew this wasn't hunting a living being. This was stopping something that was already dead, something that had worn death then shed it. I wasn't a hero. I was just a widower with a cabin, a shotgun, and a terrifying realization I was the last line of defense. The storm that had trapped me had trapped it too on the mountain. I held the shotgun steady, my knuckles white. The wind howled outside, the trees creaked. I checked the hall one last time, glanced at the horror show of the bathroom, then moved towards the front door. There was no plan. There was only the gun in my hands, worry in my heart, and the knowledge that something sinister was crawling through the snow toward civilization. I flipped the deadbolt and hit the door with my shoulder. The wind was a physical blow, a sudden, blinding white sheet that stole my breath and stung my eyes. The roar of the storm swallowed the world around. It was a complete whiteout. My eyes searched frantically for the trail. The front porch was already buried under a fresh drift, but I knelt down, shielding my face against the immediate sting of the snow. There it was, still outside the bathroom window on the other side of the perimeter. The oily black and crimson slime was already freezing, but it hadn't been buried yet. It was distinct, lying on the otherwise clean snow like spilled ink. It didn't just drip, it looked like something had slithered. I followed it, sinking immediately into the drifts up to my knees. The air was so cold it burned my lungs. I kept the Remington high. Its barrel was a dark, steady presence against the blinding white. The trail, growing in width as I followed it, led past the wood pile and headed directly for the tree line. The trees themselves were black spectres against the night, swaying and groaning under the weight of the snow. I fought against the resistance. I fought against the resistance of the deep snow, pushing myself faster, driven by the metallic reek of the slime that even in the freezing air seemed to linger. I was maybe 20 yards from the cabin, battling a sudden heavy gust when I saw it. At first I thought it was a buck driven mad by the storm. It was easily that size, low to the ground, its dark shape barely discernible in the whirling vortex of the snow where the cabin's clearing met the forest edge. But it didn't move like a deer. It didn't trot or bound. It scuttled. It was hunkered down, its massive body creating a brief moment of stillness in the blizzard, a small black shadow against the white fury. I stopped dead, sinking deeper into the drift. I raised the shotgun, pushing the safety off with a dry click. Through the shifting veil of snow, I strained to make out details, and the details I found were strange. It was hairy, thick black fur, matted and clotted. The fur was plastered down in clumps, matted thick with the same crimson slime that lined the floor of my bathroom. Its bulk seemed to be expanding, the hair giving it an immense distorted volume, but the low, hunched posture suggested it was something that preferred to crawl. It had multiple limbs, too many working in sync to move it along the ground. Thick, joined appendages that glistened unnervingly. The sight was a sickening contradiction. The heavy, dense covering of fur mixed with the raw, unnatural sheen of the slime. It looked like a living, wet wound covered in animal's coat. Then it lifted something. Its head, I realized with a shudder of pure dread. It was impossibly large and angular, but I couldn't discern a face. Then the wind cleared the snow just enough for me to see a flash of wet, sickly red where eyes or a mouth should have been, reflecting the distant, faint light from my cabin window. It didn't see me. It seemed focused entirely on the darkness of the tree line already beginning to merge with the shadows. It was moving, still low and far, dragging its huge, repulsive body away from the cabin and toward the mountain pass that led to town. I gripped the shotgun, ignoring the trembling of my own body. The blizzard made the shot difficult, but the distance was short. If I let it reach the shelter of the trees, it would be gone. I took the slack out of the trigger. There was no hesitation left in me, just the immediate primal need to stop this monstrosity before it vanished. I squeezed the trigger. The sound of the Remington going off was deafening, a violent boom that shattered the stillness of the storm. The flash of the muzzle momentarily burned the image of the creature into my retina. I felt the powerful kick of the shotgun against my shoulder, and a split second later, the buckshot slammed into the creature's massive torso. It didn't go down. Instead, the thing let out a sound that cut right through the howling wind, a screaming wail that was entirely incoherent, like tearing metal on a wet, dripping canvas. It was a noise of pain, but also of inhuman rage, and it sent a spike of pure terror through my chest. The section of its body where the shot hit seemed to absorb the impact, scattering a spray of the thick, dark slime and a few clumps of matted hair into the air. It scrambled. The monstrous body, for all its bulk, moved with terrifying speed, abandoning the relatively clear ground and lunging into the dense black of the tree line. I pumped the action, ejecting the spent shell of unloading a fresh round. Clack chuck. I didn't wait to see if it was mortally wounded. I just knew I had to keep it moving, keep it from burrowing down or reaching the path. I plunged into the forest after it, following a fresh, dark disturbance in the snow. The trees offered a brief, deceptive shield from the worst of the wind, but the snow was deep here, making every step a labor. I focused only on the trail, the churned snow, the scattered slime, the deep, heavy indentations of its multiple limbs. I ran until my lungs burned, until the cold made the skin on my face ache. until the sounds of its desperate, laborious breathing were drowned out by my own. Then I stopped. The trail vanished. One moment I was following a distinct line of destruction. The next, the snow was pristine, only marked by my own clumsy footprints. I moved forwards, a few more steps, scanning the blizzard-shrouded ground, wondering if the heavy snow had worked again against me and burrowed the sign. But no, the trail hadn't slowly faded. It ended completely, as if the creature had simply dissolved into the air. I rotated slowly, the shotgun trembling slightly in my grip, my eyes uselessly searching the area around me. My breath hitched. I caught it only as an indistinct smear of shadow, a sudden movement in my peripheral vision, high above me. I tilted my head back, staring up into the shifting, wind-whipped canopy of the pines. There was no ground trail, because the trail had continued up. The dark, oily slime wasn't on the snow anymore. It was smeared high on the bark of the nearest trees, running in sickening vertical streaks. The monster hadn't been slow. It had simply used the vertical space the forest offered. It had the high ground. It was high above, hidden by the night and the dense pine needles. I was exposed beneath it. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had gone from the hunter to the obvious, slow-moving target. I scanned the dark trunk of the nearest pines, searching for any break, any shelter that might afford me a moment of cover. About 10 feet away, a massive ancient pine had been partially uprooted long ago, its gnarled root system exposed. The dirt and thick woody roots had formed a dark protective cave against the elements. I dove toward it, dropping to my hands and knees in the snow. I wedged myself into a space beneath the largest roots, pulling the shotgun close to my chest. My back pressed against the cold, frozen earth. I held perfectly still, straining my ears against the wind, forcing myself to shrink into the shadows in the earth. It was silent again, save for the storm. The vast black space between the high branches and the low earth was now where the true danger lay. I looked up through an opening in the uplifted roots, seeing only the tangled darkness. I waited for a drop of slime, a tremor of a branch, or the silent, horrifying moment when the massive, hairy, glistening shape would descend. I stayed perfectly still, trying to slow the panicked rush of my breath. The silence, punctuated only by the wind, was unbearable. The creature was somewhere above, hunting for the man that had just fired the loud, disruptive weapon. Then the snow began to shift down, not from the storm, but from the branches above. Chunks fell, followed by a sudden, heavy thud just yards away. It had dropped. The creature was on the ground again, but now it wasn't scrambling away. It was waddling, a fast, deliberate, low-to-the-earth movement, like a massive, glistening insect trying to appear harmless. Its bulk seemed even more immense now. That was no longer distorted by the height, and I could hear the wet, squelching sound of its many appendages in the snow. It moved slowly into the small clearing around my hiding spot. I was pressed so tightly against the frozen roots that the wood dug painfully into my spine, but I didn't dare flinch. I had already positioned the Remington. My shooting hand gripped the trigger, the barrel angled slightly up and out toward the opening of the root cave, resting against the snow-covered ground. The creature's movement was erratic, darting toward the tree line one moment, then pulling back. Why hasn't it found me? Then I realized it wasn't looking for me. Its massive, misshapen head was constantly sniffing the air, lifting and twisting with jerky movements. The air was thick, the howling blizzard, and the scent of damp pine and frozen earth. The storm was masking my scents. The wind and the heavy blowing snow were scattering my nullifying my presence, covering the fresh trace of gunpowder and adrenaline. I was lucky. The storm had become my unintentional ally. After a few minutes, the sniffing paid off. The waddling ceased, and its massive, slimy, hairy form turned directly toward my root cave. It approached the gap between the thick roots, filling the dark space with its bulk. It was so close I could feel the minute vibrations of its weight disturbing the ground. And then its head lowered. The snow cleared, just long enough for me to see the details I hadn't been able to discern in the blizzard. Its head was roughly the size of a buck or moose skull, but hideously wrong. The bone structure was too broad, too blunt. It had no discernible eyes, just wide swaths of slick, wet flesh, the colour of old blood. It wasn't just fur that covered it. Its thick, dark hair was matted with the slime, forming a repulsive, heavy mane. Interspersed within this mane were a horrifying number of short, glistening, leech-like appendages that writhed slightly in the cold air, tasting and searching. Then it was inches from my face. I could smell the metallic stench of the black slime mixed with the sour, coppery odour of raw meat. I was looking into the mouth of the nightmare that had walked out of a man. One of the slick, worm-like appendages darted out, brushing against the tip of my nose. In that instant, it knew. The thing recoiled slightly, its large, blunt head drawing back the wet flesh of its face, tightening into an expression of immediate primal recognition. The meal was found, the obstacle identified. It was about to strike. I didn't let it. I drove the barrel of the Remington up and sideways, the muzzle nearly touching the side of its monstrous head. The blast was muffled and wet, an awful, contained thunder. The buckshot tore into the creature's skull from below, and the thing erupted. A horrifying geyser of black slime, wet fur and bone, fragments sprayed into the roots above me. The creature shuddered once, a massive muscular tremor before its great weight collapsed. It didn't fall on me, thankfully, but it landed directly outside my hiding spot, its massive body completely blocking the entrance. I lowered the shotgun, the noise of the ringing in my ears louder than the wind. I was trapped beneath a mountain of steaming, reeking horror. The ringing in my ears faded slowly, replaced by the sickening sound of hot, wet matter sizzling in the frozen snow. The creature's immense crawling mass was pressed up against the root system, sealing the entrance to my makeshift bunker. I could hear the wind now, muffled by the sheer volume of dead, hairy flesh. I lowered the shotgun slowly, my entire body shaking with a delayed, violent reaction. The smell was overwhelming now. A blast of copper, sulfur, and the sour sting of the creature's slime. The muzzle of the Remington was coated in gore. I had to get out. If the blizzard kept up, I'd be trapped here beneath a rotting carcass until the spring melts. I shoved the shotgun's barrel against the creature's flank, testing the weight. No movement. It was like pushing a felled waterlogged oak tree. I shifted my weight, reaching with my free hand, and finally found the edge of the root that had protected me. I pressed my shoulder against the dirt wall, and pushed, straining. The corpse moved an inch, then sank back. I had to try a different way. I turned the shotgun around and used the thick, heavy butt of the stock to scrape away the dirt and packed snow behind me, burrowing deeper into the root system. The ground was hard and frozen, but the shotgun butt gave me just enough leverage to widen a small, cramped gap between two petal roots. Gasping, I barely squeezed through the opening. I emerged on the far side of the massive pine, away from the creature's bulk. I stood up slowly, my heartbeat pounding in my temples, and walked back over to look at the kill. It lay motionless, its multi-limbed body contorted awkwardly on the snow, but something was wrong. Where the head had been, there was only a ruin of black fur and pulped bone, yet a thin, milky white steam was rising from the wound. And then I noticed the blood, or lack of it. It wasn't bleeding out. The dark black red slime was only slowly oozing, congealing almost immediately in the bitter cold. The buckshot had caused massive trauma, but the creature's internal volume seemed insufficient for its size. It felt like I had shot a sack of thick fluid rather than a complex biological organism. My eyes caught something on the creature's massive flank where the first blast of buckshot had hit. The matted fur had been stripped clean, revealing the skin beneath. It was pale, slick, and thin, stretched tight over the enormous frame. The skin was visibly healing, slowly knitting itself back together. The gaping holes from the shot were shrinking, the raw pink-red tissue pulling toward a center point. It was terrifying. Impossible regeneration. The steam wasn't from cooling blood, it was from an internal process. My breath hitched. The entire premise of this battle, that a shotgun could stop it, was a lie. I had maybe 10 minutes before it was functional again. I had to get back to the cabin. Not just for ammunition, but for something heavier, something more final. I turned and ran like a madman, the snow swallowing my footing, the low branches whipping my face. The familiar trek back to the cabin was a blur of white and black, driven by the cold fear that the monster would simply stand up behind me. I burst through the door, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt, though I knew a simple piece of metal wouldn't hold that bolt for long. I raced past the silent horror of the bathroom and into the storage closet. I didn't grab the deer rifle. A bullet was a coin toss, but a fire was a guarantee. Tucked behind the winter tires were 2 red 5-gallon jerry cans, one for the snowmobile, one for the backup generator. I grabbed the can of kerosene too. It would burn slower and hotter than gasoline, and yanked it out. Next, I needed a whip. I dove into the kitchen, grabbing the thickest rag I could find, a towel used for drying dishes, and stuffed it into my pocket. The light was my last stop. I opened the kitchen drawer and snatched a long, thin, bunting lighter used for starting the private lights. I was ready, but not fast enough. The quiet, heavy silence I endured for the past few minutes was broken by a sound I'd only heard when cutting down trees. A slow, heavy ripping sound coming from the outside of the cabin, the side where the bathroom window was. It had found its way back. The hole it had created to exit the young man's body wasn't large enough for its current monstrous size, and it wasn't trying to climb through the window. It was tearing the wall apart. I could hear the sickening crunch of frozen pine breaking and the sound of thick wood snapping. I had to assume it was fully healed or close enough to it. The storm, which had given me cover, now threatened to bury me inside my own cabin if I wasn't careful. I had to take the fire to the monster. I yanked the front door open, the kerosene can heavy and cold in my hand, and plunged back into the blizzard. The creature wasn't at the door. I rounded the corner of the cabin, the heavy kerosene sloshing, and saw the damage. A huge section of the wall near the bathroom was ruined, wood splintered and insulation steaming out like cotton dust. The creature was there, its massive steaming head pulled back from the shredded wall. It saw me instantly. The bluff of the blizzard had been called. I was standing in the open, and it was less than 20 feet away. It began its repulsive, slow waddle toward me. Its limbs churned the snow, the black slime glistened, its regenerating head tilted low. It was hummed in on me. I dropped to a knee, pulling the heavy can close. I twisted the plastic cap off, then tore the towel from my pocket, shoving one end to the neck of the can to soak. The stench of the oil and the creature's musk mingled horribly in the cold air. The monster was 10 feet away. I didn't try to aim. I just tipped the heavy can and began to drench the path between us as I walked backwards. I emptied half the 5 gallons in a wide black arc right into the snow and across the creature's forelimbs. Their kerosene didn't mix with the snow, it simply stained it, turning the white ground into a shimmering black slick. The creature didn't stop. It waddled right through the flammable pool, its greasy fur absorbing the oil. As the beast closed the distance, close enough now that I could feel the steam emanating off its bulk as I pulled the soaked towel out, threw the can aside, and flicked the butane lighter. The thin blue flame fought the wind for a fraction of a second, then held. With a final desperate roar to myself, I lit the kerosene-soaked rag like a torch and threw it directly at the monster. It hit the creature's torso, and the effect was instantaneous and brutal. The oil-soaked fur and the slick saturated snow trail ignited with a violent whoosh. The flames were furious, a shocking blast of orange and red against the white snow. The creature was engulfed in a terrible screaming pillar of fire. The kerosene and the creature's own slick, greasy essence fed the flames instantly, making them burn with a blinding hot intensity. The monster shrieked, a sound of agony and pure animal terror, and began to thrash violently in the fire. It wasn't waddling anymore. It was rolling in the snow, trying to beat out the inferno. Unfortunately for me, the flame stuck to its oiled coat like glue. It was chaotic, burning silhouettes against the backdrop of the swirling blizzard. The thick black smoke was lost immediately in the swirling white. I backed away. The heat of the fire was a shocking contrast to the bitter cold. I watched the creature convulse, unable to stop the burning, unable to deal with what was being domestically destroyed. The smell of burning hair, oil, and something metallic sweet was nauseating. Finally, after a minute that felt like an hour, the thrashing stopped. The creature lay still, a massive charred monument to my desperate resolve. The fire still ran, but the movement was gone. I leaned against the icy wood of the cabin, the shotgun forgotten on my feet. The flames were already starting to melt, a ring of snow around the body, but the blizzard continued to rage. The intense heat from the burning carcass was already beginning to recede, fighting a losing battle against the continuous onslaught of the blizzard. I stood for a moment, letting the sheer exhaustion show me the cold pragmatism and determination of the mountain man. The fire was done, and what was left of this thing couldn't be allowed to burn, not even for 1 minute. I grabbed the heavy, kerosene can and emptied the last of its contents into the smouldering pile, coaxing the flames into a furious consuming roar. I moved the equipment inside, then returned to the blazing carcass with my axe. It took a sickening 15 minutes of hacking and separating what was little what was left of the creature's bulk. I dragged the black, escaping chunks through the snow and tossed them back into the heart of the blaze. The air was thick with the stench of oil and the sweet, terrible smell of burning meat. I was purging the mountain of this evil. When I was done, only a patch of melted snow and a few glowing embers remained. I stood over the prairie, the axe handle cold in my numb hands, watching the last of the embers fade into the furious white. I turned, intending to head back inside, lock the doors, and face the grim reality of the spilt body in the bathroom. That's when I heard it. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't the groan of a tree. It was a faint, wet, screaming wail, identical to the sound the creature had made when the buckshot first hit. The sound of ripping canvas and tearing metal. It came from the same direction as the first time, from the depths of the tree line, from where the young man had come. I spun around, bringing the axe up like a shield, searching the blinding, swirling storm. My mind immediately went to the rifle, the thing I had left behind in my house in my haste. I had nothing but a bloody, snow-covered axe and a dead fire. The wail came again, closer this time, high-pitched and choked. I took a step backward, preparing to fight, when a memory finally pierced the fog of panic. The young man's vacant eyes, the young man's vacant story. Hiking with my girlfriend, Emma. Fuck. And that's where we'll leave things, for now. If you've made it this far, then you already know, these stories don't just end when the video does. They have a way of sticking with you. Maybe it's a single line you can't stop thinking about. Maybe it's a moment that felt just a little too real. Or maybe it's that quiet feeling that something isn't quite right anymore. That's the power of these stories. They don't rely on what you see. They rely on what you imagine. And sometimes what you imagine is far worse. As you sit here now, maybe everything around you feels the same way as it did before you pressed play. Same room, same shadows, same silence. But after hearing everything you just did, it might not feel quite as normal anymore. And that's okay. Because if something felt unsettling, if something made you pause or rewind or even glance around for a second, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. I'd love to know which story got to you the most. Seriously, drop it in the comments. I read all of them, and I'm always curious to see what sticks with different people. Sometimes it's not the obvious ones. Sometimes it's the quiet, subtle details that hit the hardest. And if you want more like this, more stories that creep in slowly and stay with you long after, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and stick around. There's always more out there. More stories, more voices, more things waiting to be found. But for now, take a second before you move on. Sit with the silence and let everything settle. And when you do finally turn off the video, maybe don't turn around too quickly. Sleep well, if you can.